Lance Zierlein joins us in his weekly spot. Lance, appreciate the time as always. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, guys. How we doing?
Good, Lance. So we were talking last segment about Brandon Cooks and his possible trade value. Curious your take on this. If the Texans traded Cooks, what do you think they could get on the open market for him?
Well, I have to see what's left on his contract because that's before you even start trying to determine what a player's value is. The more club control there is, the better the chance to get the best value possible, especially if the contract's reasonable. The less club control, the more likely you've got a rental on your hands, and people are less likely to give you what you think you're going to get. That's why so many fans are so far off so frequently on what they think a trade value is. They'll hear a deal and they just can't believe it. And it's because there's variables that really can drastically alter the market in terms of what a trade value would be. For Brandon Cook, there are some players who are still on the free agent market, so you could go cheaper than Brandon Cooks. I think that basically what you'd be looking at, he's already said he doesn't want to leave, for example. This is it, I'm not going anywhere else. Well, then I guess you'll retire, because if the Texans decide to try to trade him, they're going to decide to trade him. My guess is you'd get probably in the neighborhood of a fourth. I don't care what he's been traded for in the past. That's completely irrelevant. Right now, I think from a value standpoint, his age, his price tag, I think a fourth is about the best you could hope for from Brandon Cooks right now.
Lance, I know that post-season workouts ahead of the draft are just an element of the assessment, but I've seen quite a few people talk about Kyle Hamilton and the 40 time, a reported 4.70 40 at his pro day. Obviously, it was a little bit faster in Indy. You've talked about how it was a fast track in Indy, so to speak. Overrated, underrated, the conversation around Kyle Hamilton's 40 time when you think about him as a prospect?
So I think you have to have context. The context for this, and we talked about it a little bit this morning, is that what's the entire workout? Well, he had an 11-foot broad jump. He had 11-foot broad jump and a really high vertical leap. So what it shows is he's an explosive player. He has explosive legs, explosive drive. He's an explosive short area guy. So that was good. The 40 time was not good. Well, okay, so let's go to the tape and let's figure out how does that manifest itself in football. Well, the ability to play over the top, to be able to go from, if you wanted a diverse scheme and he's playing over the top and a player on the sideline runs a go route and the cornerback's got one-on-one and he's got a range over the top. He may not have the speed to get there on time, and that all of a sudden means he is now less scheme versatile than before. You don't have the same speed that you hope for. And I always hear people tell me, well, just trust the tape. The tape against who? Like who are these? Who is the great talent that Notre Dame played against? Was it Cincinnati's Alec Pierce, or was it a wide receiver from Notre Dame? From Wisconsin? Like who's this incredible talent, this NFL talent that I have to trust the tape against? In my write-up, I talk about the fact that he does struggle when he's playing in retreat, meaning he's got kind of some hip tightness and he doesn't hit the gas fast whenever he makes his transitions to turn and run backwards, to run like in a retreating position against the deep ball. And so I mentioned that because that showed up on tape as a concern. So what you do is you just play him downhill. You play him near the line of scrimmage. You play him on running backs and on tight ends and occasionally some bigger slot receivers. So I think what you have to do is just have a scheme that makes sense for him. I don't think it's underrated because there's lots of safeties who flop, who are a 4.7 40, who don't make it because they're just simply not fast enough. But what I see with Kyle Hamilton is he is a good tester other than the 40 time, and I think he has the type of instincts and the type of the type of talent that if you put him in the right scheme, he can still be a high-impact player. So I do think there's a chance he could fall out of the top 10 for sure. As a matter of fact, I think I might make that the favorite. So it is going to have an impact on him for sure.
Lance, another guy that is seemingly watching his stock fall is Tyler Linderbaum, the center out of Iowa, who I think is an extremely talented player. I think most people view him as the top center in this class, but it just feels like he's falling down draft boards and mock drafts a little bit. Last year there wasn't a center that went in the first round. Do you think there's any chance that Tyler Linderbaum falls out of the first round and could be an option early day 2 for the Texans?
Yeah, I think there's a chance, and I took a bunch of heat for having him in to Cincinnati at 31 in my very first mock. But the fact is, historically, centers who are undersized, which he is, who have short arms, and he has really short arms, under 32-inch arms, who play in a very specific scheme, which is a zone scheme. Well, now all of a sudden you've said, okay, he's really a fit for a certain type of offense. So now you've eliminated some of the other running games out there. So now there's fewer teams are going to be looking at him. So you say, okay, which teams need a center? Those are the teams that are looking at him because he's not a guard. He's a center only. So he's a one-position player that is going to be considered by teams who need centers. Now you eliminate teams who play power schemes, more gap-oriented downhill running attacks. Linderbaum is probably off the board in the first round for teams like that. And now you've really limited your amount of teams. And now teams who have certain physical traits and standards for size, like height, weight, length, that they require for a player to be if they're going to draft them in the first round, where the money is, more guaranteed money and more expensive. Now you've eliminated even more teams. So what you have now is a much, much smaller pool of teams who are going to be interested in Linderbaum as a first-round player. Not as a player in general. I think there's a lot of teams who will be interested in him as a player, but you've really limited the amount of teams willing to consider him, and it's not a position of high priority. There's a player out of North Carolina State who was drafted in the first round by Minnesota, and he has been Garrett. I'm blanking out on the last name for some reason, but
Bradbury.
Garrett Bradbury,
yeah.
And Garrett Bradbury's just been average. I mean, certainly not worthy of a first-round selection. So I think that's what you're looking at right now is teams are going to look and say, man, this guy reminds me of Garrett Bradbury, and Garrett Bradbury has not been worthy of a first-round pick. And so that's where you start to get hurt if you're Tyler Linderbaum. So I could see a scenario where he doesn't make it in the first round, absolutely. And he could be there for Houston, but I will tell you, from everything I'm hearing, I'm not sure that Pep Hamilton is going to run an offensive scheme that really relies on zone scheme and outside stretch plays. I think it's going to be more downhill, so he may not even be on their board.
Lance Zierlein joining us in his weekly segment on the program on the HR&P guest line. Lance, if we ask you what's the best case scenario for the Texans in this draft and the worst case scenario for the Texans in this draft, how would you answer that question?
Well, I think the best case scenario right now is going to unfold because you now have Trayvon Walker being pushed way up the board. You have Aiden Hutchinson, who's either going to go 2 or fall to 3. I think there's a better than average chance that Ekwonu and Neal and possibly Hutchinson, 2 of those 3, I think are going to end up being available to you. So that's best case scenario. I mean, that's truly best case scenario. So then I think best case scenario would then be a team who really likes one of those players. Maybe it's Carolina at 6. Maybe it's the Giants at 5 who want to jump ahead of the Jets. I think the best case scenario would be 5 or 6 asking to trade up into your spot where you still get a really good player at 5 or 6 and you are able to add a draft pick. To me, that's the best case scenario. So having the board fall a certain way and then having a team that's not far behind you try to trade up in front of other teams. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, I think worst case scenario for me would be possibly having Evan Neal go to – I don't know that there is a worst case scenario. I mean, I think you're going to get a pretty good football player in Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, Evan Neal. I think one of those 3 is going to be available for you. So I really, honestly, I don't think it's a worst case scenario unless, the Texans were to reach and say Kyle Hamilton, who I'm a big fan of Kyle Hamilton. But I don't think you draft a safety who does not have elite traits across the board. I mean, it's got to be super elite, too, to draft a safety there. I think that would almost be kind of a worst-case scenario because I don't think the value's there in drafting a safety. But honestly, I think if the Texans play it straight, it should be a pretty good draft for them.
Lance, real quick, just following up on something you said there. If Hutchinson doesn't go 1, who do you think goes 1 to Jacksonville?
Trayvon Walker.
Wow.
I think Trayvon Walker is going 1.
Wow. There you have it.
Yeah.
Lance Zierlein joining us on
I'm
the
locking
HR.
that in on the next mock.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Hey, all right.
All right. Some breaking news early. Lance, we appreciate it, man. We know how busy you are this time of year, so thanks for carving out a couple minutes.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
Lance Zierlein joining us there on the HR&P guest line. He'll be on the bench tomorrow with John Granado. You can listen to him each and every weekday morning from 7A to 10A.
I can't even describe how excited I would be for what he just described.
We got to react to this.
I got a whole bunch of stuff I want to say about this.
More coming up. We are the Wheelhouse right here, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.